And here we are. Hello, everybody. I'm Kelly Byrnes here with Brett and Dr. Jennifer Nash. We are so honored to have you with us, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and we've been doing this for almost 2 years together. I forgot if this is our 21st together, I think, 20th, 21st. And so we're very excited to get to you're our first time having the author come. So we've never even asked them to come. So we're excited that, or I think I asked like one or two before, but they weren't able to, and that's been over a year. So we're really excited to get to talk with you about your book, and we'll do formal introductions in a minute because I want to tell everybody about your background in more detail. But Brett, do you want to do a brief intro for you?
Sure. My name is Bret Getzel. I'm a industry expert in supply chain management. Do a lot of things domestically in the protein space, as well as on the international side. So a little over 30 years in sales leadership, sales management, MBA in finance from Rockhurst, which is where Kelly and I came to meet one another. Parent of two young girls in their early 20s, both college educated and entering the professional world, and happily married here after I think 25 years. Actually, is my anniversary this year, and my wife's approaching retirement here at the end of the year. So got a few milestones happening in my life, but really enjoyed my time with Kelly. And I was counting, Kelly, I think our first book review, if I'm not mistaken, was October. So this might be number 22, I think, August, September. Yeah, I think this is number 22. But yeah, never in my dreams did I imagine that this would take on the life that it has. And I think it's far from being done.
Never in your wildest dreams when you took that MBA class 3 or 4 years ago. And then you came in as a guest speaker. Invited him as a guest speaker the next year, and he hauls in like 100 books and piles them up on a table. And I had done a couple of these on my own, and I said, "Would you join me in this endeavor? And I don't know what this is going to be, but if we get in the regular cadence." And he said yes. And then our buddy Dave is a professor at Rockhurst in data science and healthcare, and he isn't able to join today, but he's our other partner in crime. And we usually just have kind of we have a flow that we go through. And our whole purpose for these is to inspire the leaders of today to continue investing in themselves, invest in their development so that they'll be great leaders tomorrow. So that's our intention in these. And we usually spend some time sharing stories and experiences. But I think today we're going to dive right in, unless you have a quick one, Brett.
No, I do. Kelly's right. I open up everyone and I share all the different ways that I'm applying these principles. I will share one real quick because I actually just did it an hour ago. So I lead what I call a team member development initiative, and it's usually focused around a book. And one book is usually sales specific, whether it's negotiation, managing your sales pipeline, and then the other one is a book like this, Be Human, Lead Human. And we use a Trello board for discussion questions, and then I usually host an online town hall. So I actually did that just an hour ago. I spoke for about 50 minutes and had some questions and things like that. But I think if you wanted to summarize that, right, it's really walking the talk. It's one thing to say, hey, I do these things, but then actually applying them in practice. And as I share with Kelly through the month, all of these recordings are posted and they end up on the internet. And, it stays on the internet forever. And it's literally become my personal brand. As I go out and I introduce myself to new clients or new people, this just becomes it's become an essence of who I am and what I do. And as I make introductions to people, more often than not, I'm sharing the URL to our websites, and the response is just overwhelmingly positive. It's become interesting to me how it's just kind of become part of who I am. It's overwhelming. I guess it's shocking how it's taken on a life at home. It really has.
It's so exciting. And we both read a lot of books that we don't choose for the book of the month. And we have a lot of other conversations, and when we like a lot of other books, but they're not ones that we recommend for people to read, or they're not, we're trying to focus on business leaders. So some are good for other reasons, but not the ones that we recommend. Oh, one thing I was going to start with, like the best news of the last month. So any good news of the last month for either of you? Jennifer, what have you been up to?
Well, I've been doing a little bit of traveling and talking about Be Human and Lead Human, and I just got back last night actually, from a wonderful leadership summit at a large software organization here in the United States. So very happy to be there presenting and very honored to share the message of Be Human, Lead Human with that organization.
Okay.
And yeah, just enjoying, being a first-time author. So it's quite a journey.
Yes, I want to ask you about your journey too.
Mhm.
So yeah, I want to ask about that. I know we have people that want to write books and are part of this listening. You know what? And last time I forgot to pay attention to the comments. So if you're joining us, feel free to post a comment to Jennifer. Last time, remember, Brett, we got so into our conversation with each other, we forgot to look. But I'll try to get better at that.
I'll keep an eye on them.
And so feel free to post comments. And we do have a lot of people that look afterwards. So if anybody posts and watches the video later, if they have a question for you, I'll tag you and call your attention to it. And then I will post links as well to the website where they can learn more. But the reason we chose this book is that Be Human, Lead Human, the topic is one that hits home to our hearts. But there was just so much in common that we have in our backgrounds that we're Brett and Dave and I are really particular about the authors. We want people with real business experience, and we like academia too, because we all come in that space. But we really like the real business experience, and so that was one of the biggest things. And then I know you're good friends with Marshall Goldsmith, and you're in his MG 100, is it? Or yeah. And we did his book last year, the Earned Life, and then I created the workbook for that because I was waiting for a workbook after we did his, or after I read it early last year, and there wasn't one coming. So I asked, could I do your workbook for you? And yes, so I got to know him through that. And then I created My Fulfilling Life to take that whole thing a step further. And so it ties in with like the first part of your book about who the leader is as a person. And most of the leadership books don't go into that enough. And I think a lot of them think it's too touchy-feely or something. So I just love that you go into that so much, and really appreciate that. So all that's why we chose this book. But before we dive into all of that, I want to do like I could spend an hour on your career, but I do want to tell everybody what it is. So like the bona fides are here for her, and you've done the work to have the credibility to write this book at this time. And you know what? Something else told me when I was preparing this yesterday and today, I thought, I bet you have other books in you that you would be able to write as well. So I know you're probably still overwhelmed from this journey, but very interesting career that Jennifer has had. Okay, and you started career as bilingual business analyst for electronic data systems, and Brett and I are both in Kansas City, and we had a big EDS office in the Kansas City area back in the 90s. Okay, bilingual data analyst. That's so interesting already. So was it Spanish, or what was your other language?
Well, in theory, it was actually trilingual, so it was French and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
something. Yeah, that's amazing. And then joined Kelly Services for about 8 years, and that's a recruiting firm. And you were on site at Ford. So in recruiting, you're doing a variety of different jobs there, right? Filling different jobs, so you get exposure to the organization in a different way than if you were in one department or something. So that must have been interesting too. And then joined them in the the organization development department. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so interesting. And how fun to get the view before you're on the team.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, just amazing. And then entered academia during that time. I wrote in my note, entered academia, went to the University of Michigan, and then did a lot during the whole course there from 2009 through 16 and beyond, and research assistant, career coach, guest lecturer, and got a PhD, and then joined Deloitte as the manager of leadership development and a member of their faculty, and then became chief of staff at Deloitte. Holy moly. Yeah, that's amazing. It's really
Yeah,
good.
and Kelly, I want to also just give a quick shout out because during all that time that you just mentioned, I also earned my MBA at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. So Wolverines, go blue! I gotta.
Yeah.
I
mean, I'm a Notre Dame fan, but I'm going to let that go.
Okay, that's
I'm not
okay. If we're
gonna
not
put that out.
playing you, it's okay. I'll still root for you if we're not playing you.
No, that was, yeah. And that was your PhD from Case. Is it your PhD from there also, or it's from?
No, my PhD is from Case Western
Okay.
in Ohio.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then, but that wasn't all, as if that all wasn't enough. And then the Harvard McLean Institute fellow, coaching fellow, and then something that's on my list for a long time, the Harvard Business Review contributor. So all of these things in Harvard Business Review, and then the Marshall Goldsmith we mentioned, and then started your own company in 2018. And then did you start working on the book back then? Was that part of why you started your own business, or did that come from that, or which came first? Or
so I actually started working on the book. I like, when people ask me that question, I've been working on this book since I entered into the business world back in 1994. I was a huge observer of what was going on around me because with my background, I didn't have necessarily, a lot of training in the business world. So everything was very foreign to me. And I started observing and noticing what was going on around me and trying to see the patterns in that and making sense of it. And so that continued and, throughout my entire career. And I, went back and got my MBA, went back and got my PhD. And during the PhD time was when I officially started formally researching the book. So it was really quite a long process from conducting all the research for the book. And then when I graduated with my PhD, I conducted additional field research so that I had additional stories and additional, data points to share in the book. So the data collection process was pretty lengthy. And it took me, COVID hit in all of that time frame as well.
Yeah.
So it probably took me a little longer than it would have normally to get the book out. But I do think that things appear when they're meant to appear. And I'm glad that the book came out now. I think it's the right time.
Yeah, it feels like that to me too.
Yeah.
Also, and you're married and have a family and stuff too. So you also have a life beyond all of this career too. I saw your husband on the webinar that I attended with Alan Mulally, your launch that, and he spoke, and you had worked with him at Ford, but when he spoke at your webinar that day, that was just amazing. And I thought he was just going to, I don't know him. So I thought, he'll just talk for a minute because that's really nice. And just for him to show up, I thought was so nice. Yeah. But then he just went on and on and on. And he stayed out the whole time. Like, that was really nice.
He's quite a special person. And he really, he is unlike anyone I have ever met, particularly when you assign that, CEO role title to that person. Very unique individual. And I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to work with him, while I was at Ford, but also now, to partner with him and, share this experience with him going forward. It's been amazing. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, and your book is like the underlying of his philosophy. Like, it's deeper, he talks about a lot of this too, but it ties right in with his philosophy. So with that paper plate story, did he go back and say anything to those people, like slap them upside the head, or do you know anything that came out of that? Or
I don't know. And in true Alan style, if he had done that, I would never know about it.
Oh, that's true.
He's that kind of leader, so I wouldn't have insight to that.
And that I'd heard you share that story before I'd read it, or before that webinar, or in the launch part of the book or something. But that just cuts to me, because I know so many people have had similar situations, and then they get through to the leader who's great.
Yes.
Do you want to tell that story really quick for our at least listeners that haven't seen it?
Sure. Yeah. I'd hate to ruin the spoiler if people are in the middle of it or if they haven't read it, but I'm happy to share it if you think it's appropriate.
I don't know. Do you think should we not share it or share it? It's a good story, but I don't want to ruin it either.
Bring it on.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the story starts out, in 2009. I was working at Ford, and at the time, it was a pretty severe recession. We were having a lot of problems, and the company was in a very serious, situation of survival. Die or survive, basically. So I thought that at the time, Alan was doing a really hard job. He was in a position where he had to make some, pretty difficult decisions, and it's a pretty lonely space up at that top. And I just felt like, maybe he could use a few words of encouragement. And so, the IT department in my group had decided that despite, and maybe because of, the low morale at the time, and despite the economic situation, they still wanted to have an employee engagement event. And so some of the leadership in the group bought these paper plates, like the picnic style white paper plates that you get, at the grocery store. And they brought in some stickers and markers and crayons and like threw them all over the tables in the big hallway, and, said, go at it. And, basically write an appreciation plate for someone. Well, I decided that Alan needed to get my appreciation plate. And so I, designed the plate, and I put Superman stickers all around it and wrote a message in the middle that, at this point, I don't remember exactly, but it said something like, we had just celebrated our 100-year anniversary as well at the time. And so, I just left this message for Alan that said, I'm so grateful that, thank you for doing what you're doing so that we can survive another 100 years. You're the change that we needed to see in the organization. Because there were some factors going on at Ford, like in a lot of big organizations, where things don't necessarily work as smoothly, and there's a lot of politics. And so, he was encouraging people to just sort of let go of some of that and come together for the common good and support the company so that we could survive. And so I packaged up this little paper plate in one of the interoffice envelopes, that had the little string on the end of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And dropped it in the interoffice mail. And I really never thought that I would see it again. And lo and behold, a couple weeks later, I get summoned down to the leader of leaders offices down in the corner, right, of the building. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I think I'm going to get fired because, at the time, the situation was dire.
Yeah.
And, there was a lot of cost cutting going on, and generally organizations will cut heads when that's happening. So I'm thinking, okay, and everyone at the time had their boxes under their desks. They were ready because you just didn't know who was going to get cut. And so I walk down there, and I've got this dread in my stomach, and I walk into the office, and there's, several of these high-level leaders around this round table in the middle of the office. And in the middle of the table, I see an interoffice envelope. And Kelly, I knew exactly what was in that envelope as soon as I saw it. And so they looked at me and they said, we're really sorry, but we can't get this to Alan. And I said, well, I don't really understand that because I'm pretty sure the mail delivery people are still here. It's just in our office, just over to World headquarters
right there.
Drop it off. And, they're like, well, that's not really what we meant, and then I noticed that on the back of the envelope that it had been unsealed and it had been undone with the string. So they had opened it and looked at it and decided that it wasn't okay to send this to the CEO. And I was not happy with that because I felt like my voice was being silenced, and my ability to demonstrate a thank you and appreciation to someone who I thought was doing a really hard job and just needed a pat on the back was being rejected. And that didn't feel good to me, and it didn't sit well with me. And I've never been one for following the rules. And at that point, I just was like, you know what? I'm done with this. So I took the envelope back and I walked out of the office. I immediately got into my car, drove over to World headquarters, went up to the 12th floor, and, Alan wasn't in, but I asked his assistant, would you please give this to him when he gets back? And she's like, oh, absolutely. Well, great. So I go back down the elevator and, admire all the GTs that were in the lobby because I was at the time, and, get back in my car and drive back and, go back to the office. And a couple weeks later, I get this message on my voicemail. And it's Alan telling me how much he appreciated this plate and that he had a tear in his eye because of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here I am, this people leader with a, P&L and all of that, but he doesn't know who I am. Like, he's way up there. I'm, and so I'm like, wow, that was really cool. Like, I can't believe he called me. That's wow. Like, I've never seen leader behavior before, right? Like, I'd been working for 16 years at this point and never experienced that. And so, I got the mess. It was a message on my phone because I'd been out at the doctor's anyway. So I come back into the office a couple weeks later, and there's this big interoffice envelope on my desk. And I open the interoffice envelope, and inside there's a whole bunch of Ford swag. And that was all great. But like, the greatest part about it was that there was this handwritten letter inside. And Alan had written, "Dear Jennifer," and he had put a heart around the Jennifer on the letter.
Oh, I just got chills.
And I am telling you, like, that was the first time that I felt seen, that I felt appreciated, and then I felt that I mattered in an organization for more than just the output that I could provide to that organization.
Wow.
I felt like I mattered because I was simply a human being. And that honestly was the catalyst that drove me to start writing this book. It was the catalyst that drove me to go back and get my MBA, because I really wanted to understand, why are there not more leaders like this? Why do we not have more leader behavior that we look up to and want to emulate in this way? When, as humans, we mimic what we see. That's how we learn. And so when you go into an organization and you see behaviors that may not necessarily be the best behaviors for situations, but you see them and then that's all you know, that's what you do. And when you do better, you know better. When you know better, you do better, like Maya Angelou says. So, getting this letter from Alan and seeing that, wow, there was actually a different way to lead, and perhaps a more effective way to lead. And when you take a look at the results that Alan achieved during his tenure, going from a 40% to a 93% engagement rate, positive, going to a 1,837%, increase in the stock price during his tenure. I don't know that there's many people that can argue with that when you have a focus on people, that the profits and the results will follow.
Right.
And so, I did my MBA. I learned a little bit about that. I discovered what, management and organizations meant, because I hadn't had exposure to that before. I was thrilled because I felt like, wow, I finally feel where I fit, because I love this stuff. And they graduated me before I could take all the classes, which I wasn't happy about, but we'll get that in order. And so then I thought, okay, well, I really want to learn more. I'm still more interested in how we can enable and facilitate this type of leadership behavior that clearly has positive, measurable results. And so I went and got my PhD, and I studied that, for my PhD, and then wrote my dissertation on it. So the outgrowth of all of that, this cumulative effect of, starting in business where I didn't really understand the lay of the land. I didn't understand why there were all these sports terms being used all the time.
Wow.
I didn't understand why there was this bro culture going on, and so all of that to finishing the PhD and moving through industry, moving through professional services, and then deciding, what, I'm going to go out on my own and serve clients and use the learning that I have acquired to, bring this type of leadership to the world and make the world a better place, one leader at a time. And so that is a very long-winded answer to your question around, the paper plate story.
It's so good though, because the so many different components of that, and how you were feeling and your part all along in that journey of that paper plate, but then the other leaders and how they interpreted the plate, and they probably, maybe they had MBAs, or they were the business operations people, and that's what they're looking at, the traditional business things, and not thinking of heart and humanity and seeing you as a person, or seeing him as a person. They didn't know that would matter to him. That I remember him saying on that the call that day that it mattered to him that he got that. That's
I thought it was so interesting, because when you compare the leader behavior in that office, right, where they're telling me, oh, we can't do this. It was so much of the status quo and sticking to the rules and following the behaviors that had been role modeled before them. Right. And then to contrast that with the behavior of the CEO, who responded literally with heart responded in a way that acknowledged that humanity and brought that to the forefront instead of prioritizing process or prioritizing procedure.
Just be a person. Just be a person.
The thing I'm thinking of is mentorship, and with Alan Mulally demonstrating, exceptional EQ skills. Did that permeate? Did it move throughout the organization and see a behavioral shift at that C level within that first team of leaders, or did they continue to maintain the status quo in spite of him walking a different walk?
It was interesting to observe that shift. So, I was there while all of that was happening, right? And as employees, everyone carried a little badge that, was on the back of our employee badge, and it said One Ford on it. And on the one side, it described, what One Ford meant. And on the back of it, it described all of the behaviors, the operating principles and practices that were expected of the employees, everyone. And everyone needed to adhere to those behaviors. And if you didn't want to do that, that was fine. But you were encouraged to find another place that would suit you better. And so it was a self-selection out of that process, which was genius. And so it was a place where if the behavior was being exhibited that wasn't on the card or that wasn't acceptable anymore, there were some processes that would happen in the room, right? Everyone would stop talking and look at you. And you would know immediately, oh yeah, that's right. That was on, and they were all on the wall. You could just look up there and see that. And all people would have to do is go, hey, check the wall,
we don't do that here anymore. Oops, sorry, my bad.
This isn't how we operate anymore. We treat each other with respect. We don't make jokes behind other people's backs, because then you lose trust. And we need to work together to solve this problem. We can't be dividing ourselves by laughing at each other and making jokes at others' expense. And so it really was, it was phenomenal to see how that started at the top, Brett, and cascaded down through, the different levels. And it went all the way to the bottom. And, before I left, because I left in 2009, but before I left, that had permeated throughout the culture, and it stayed that way. I can't speak for, what happened after Alan stepped out of the office, but it did stay that way for the time I was there and through his time in the office.
That made me think of another organization where had a meeting that during the meetings, the senior level person was like these one-liner disparaging comments. And so they weren't terrible comments, they weren't the worst things ever, but it'd be kind of like, oh, well, that's Steve, he's always late, or, oh, that's just these one. It's like not the worst things you'd ever hear, but they were unnecessary to say. And the colleague who walked me out said something about that. And so it became, I could see it's a culture where now it's okay for everyone to talk bad about each other.
Exactly.
Well, I think that the thing that you see is it takes a bold, transformative leader like an Alan Mulally to break the mold. And, we talk a lot about the kind of the dated command and control culture, and somebody has to go first, right? Somebody's got to stand up and say, follow me, I'll lead. And yes. Obviously he did that. And then the leaders that come behind, whether he teaches them in academia, whether he mentors them professionally within industry, they pick up and acquire this new skill set. So, one becomes two becomes four, and it definitely permeates throughout industry as it moves on. But I think I think some people would argue it's the millennials, Gen Z, Gen X. I would argue to the contrary, right? We're finding more and more leaders like the Gary Byrnesons of the world, the Alan Mullallys, that are saying, you know what, there is a better way. There is a different way. And you know what, I will go first. And once that demonstrates that behavior's modeled, particularly when you get the results that Jennifer was talking about that Ford did, hey, there's something here. There's a magic to it. There's a process, and we can do that too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can look at Hubert Joly and what he did at Best Buy, right?
We covered that one.
Yeah, we did his book too.
Yes, I saw that, right? So he truly put people first. You can look at Indra Nooyi, what she did at Pepsi, what she had published. Look at Texas Roadhouse. There's many examples. I don't know if you've covered Good to Great, the book.
I've read it many times. We didn't do it together, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a few examples in there as well.
Yeah.
And Zampos too. Zappos is a great example of putting their people first. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, actually, this one example I just had, I love this. I go to Starbucks, and so can I say that on here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So I went to Starbucks and I was getting my normal, order, and there was a longer wait at the window than there normally was. And I'm like, okay, well, they must be backed up. So I'm just sitting there. And so all of a sudden, like the Starbucks, his name was David, he opens the window and he's like, hey, do you want to play like Would You Rather? And I'm like, huh? He's like, yeah, I said, sure, let's go. And so he's like, well, would you rather be, stung by a bee or stung by a mosquito?
Oh, wow.
And so we're playing this, like, would you rather, while I'm waiting for the, for my drink. And I just thought, this was genius, because otherwise I'd be sitting here, I'd be annoyed that I was being held up from getting to where I needed to go. Right.
Yeah.
And my drink was taking long and I was thirsty, and it's over 100 degrees here in Texas. So
Yeah,
we want our drinks cold, and
yeah,
we want them, pretty quickly. And so, but I just thought it was genius that they had that,
yeah,
so that you could help, not only get to know the person that was at the window, and they could get to know you, but you could see them in a different light. And when you bring humor to the situation, it just diffuses some of those other things that might be coming up. Yeah, I thought it was
great. I love that.
So now every Starbucks I go to, I'm asking them, hey, do you guys have the Would You Rather game?
And can you picture them doing a brainstorm of like, okay, when we're backed up, what could we do to take the customer's mind off, or like just to, be one with the customer? Like, hey, we could play this, and everybody would laugh, but hey, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Then just treat people like it's a person.
Yes.
Treat the customer like it's a person, and they won't be as mad at you.
Yes.
Treat the customer like they're a number that you just want their money, and they're going to be annoyed that you're not serving them better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was really genius. And we've all been through Starbucks drive-thrus, right? And that's the only time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
So any Starbucks people out there listening,
that's a good one.
A great one over here. And you need to roll that out through your entire stores.
Or where else can you do that? What about even at a, in an office, and you're on a Zoom waiting for somebody else to arrive, rather than have people being annoyed that the other person's not here yet. Like, would you rather?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Right.
So
actually a book. Yeah, it was a book that he had, Kelly. So I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought he was so clever just to have these questions off the top of his head.
No, it was a book. He just randomly flipped a page. I'm like, stop. He's like, okay. And so we just took.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right. We should look that book up too.
Hey, I'm going to ask you a question about the book, Jennifer. So we've covered a lot of books, as you know, and what I found particularly interesting was the format of how you structured each chapter. The first opens with a case study, goes through some principles, and then it's got, I believe, I don't remember how you phrased the last part, but kind of your key takeaways, I believe is what you referred to it. When you approached that, did you read other books, read other authors? I'm sure you did, and said, hey, I don't like how this one flows. I do how like that one flows, because I found the flow and the format and the setup of your book to be particularly impactful, and the way it laid out. And obviously the HLI website, I went and took the assessment as well, which I thought was very, very well done. But I'm just curious to say, did you read books that worked, and then did you read books that didn't work, and say, none of that, more of this? How did you come to the format that you've got? Because I think it really works well.
Well, thank you. First of all, I appreciate the kind comments. It's very nice. And I also appreciate that you appreciate the flow of the book, because I worked so hard on that. I will tell you, I have like 4 versions of the outline of the book, and that's where I ended up landing. And to answer your question, I've read a lot of leadership books, and some I thought were structured maybe more effectively than others, and others had different pros to them than others did. So it was a conglomeration of things, but for me, it was very, very important to me that this book be a useful manual that people can open up and use. And it wasn't academic theory that sits on a shelf and no one reads. And so
you must have read my notes. Those are literally my scripted notes, almost word for word. High five.
Well, having been in the academic world, I understand the challenge, right? So, but I really wanted, I wanted this to be something that was pragmatic for people, that had strategic pieces to it, that had operational pieces to it, and that had tactical pieces to it. And I wanted it to be evergreen so that anyone could pick it up, whether they're, a young professional just starting out in their first career, whether they are a mid-level person who is like going into a people leadership role for the first time, whether they're at the end of their career and they're looking for what is that next chapter in their career journey going to look like, how do they design that with intention. The book is really structured so that it takes you through the evolution of how you want to be designing your leadership with intention. And what does that look like? And what do you want your experience to be? And then once you define that, how are you going to get there? And how are you going to measure that you got there? And how do you know that you've arrived? And so it really lays out, I think, in a unique way, very differently from some of the other leadership books that I've read, that ability to create essentially a leadership strategic roadmap for yourself that takes you from the beginning all the way to the execution, and then allows you that framework to create those milestones and steps that you will take to put that roadmap in place.
Yeah, I think you really hit the mark. So often the books that we read, they'll have the case studies, they'll have the examples, they'll have historical context, but where they fall off is what you said. Hey, what's the roadmap? How do I apply that in my own life? How do I make my strategic career path align with some of these people who we believe are best in class? So yeah, I think you definitely hit the mark on all those points, and really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I wanted it also to be story-based, right? I mean, we're human. We learn best by stories. Look at the caves in Lascaux. I mean, that's how we learn, is through stories. And so I really wanted it to come alive through all these different voices of people who, have led in such a human way and illustrated so beautifully the power of human leadership and the results that can engender when it's done, well. And so it, from, a diversity of voices, from different backgrounds, from different industries, different colors we have represented, it was very inclusive from that perspective. And I was very happy about that as well.
You had so much time with Alan at Ford. I'm curious, I mean, did these things just come naturally to him? That's who he was, and he lived and breathed that? Or would the alternative be, say, he had to be deliberate and intentional about that leadership style? And not everybody comes to this by second nature, right? They have to literally say, you know what, this is part of my strategic goal, my daily goal, to have so many interactions, so much time with the rank and file. I'm just curious, because obviously Alan's one of the best of the best.
Yes.
Does a guy like that just simply come to these skills naturally or by default, or does he literally train himself?
I think that's a great question. And it brings up, the nature versus nurture argument, right? And we hear that all the time with leadership. I think, I can't speak for Alan directly, but what I will say about my perception of him as a person and my perception of him as a leader is that they are one and the same. Who he is as a person is who he is as a leader. And he's very consistent. So what you're going to get with Alan, what you're going to see. You can rely on that. It's not this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where you don't know the leader who's going to be in front of you that day. You may not recognize them because they're having a temper tantrum, or, it may be the wrong day to ask for a raise because they're in a bad mood about something, right? Alan is extremely consistent in how he behaves and how he shows up. And I think, a great leader is able to have that emotional equanimity where they're able to emotionally self-manage, like you were mentioning those great EQ skills before. So they can also help others around them manage that emotional temperature. I think that's the first thing I will say. The second thing I will say is that, so often we have this perception that the professional life and the personal life, forever must be separate, right? That we aren't the same person when we walk in the office door. We have to have our armor on and our faces on, and, it's game day, right? Like, we got to go. And, I would argue that, who you are and what is important to you as a person is exactly how you're going to show up as a leader. And it also reflects the behaviors that you have. I've worked in the past with a client who, was explaining to me some of the challenges he was having in his workplace. And, I mentioned to him that I was seeing a few patterns that he was telling me and asked him if it was okay to share those with him. And he said, yes. And when I did, I said, so, I'm noticing this and this and this. And by the way, you're treating me that way too, as your coach. And what do you think about all that? And at that moment, he had a little aha, that I could see light up above his head. And he basically said, oh my gosh, like, the way that I'm treating my colleagues and my peers and my direct reports at work is exactly how I'm treating my children and my wife. And it was a huge moment for him. And it was something that helped him understand who he was as a leader had everything to do with who he was as a person.
Right.
And so that's the second thing I'll say about that. And the third thing I will say is that, from a nature versus nurture perspective, I think that some people they do have, competencies and capabilities in that space that are stronger than other people. And like with any strength, any strength or weakness, we all have those.
Yeah.
And so when you're starting off the starting line and you have a few of those in your back pocket that are a little bit easier for you to come more naturally, absolutely, you're going to be a little more skilled at that. And I think what takes those great leaders and makes them outstanding is that they work to develop those strengths and they constantly seek to improve. They constantly look to learn. And that is what really makes them outstanding.
Yeah, that appetite for continuous learning has been a common theme throughout many of the books that we've read, and you just reinforced that. High five on that. So we got a note here, and Kelly asked about, what gets in the way of inspiring. And as I prepared my response, you made a note about the behaviors that get in the way: lack of vision, inability to tell stories, and you just emphasized the importance of being able to tell stories and how we learn in that way. Inauthentic leadership and a lack of trust. And again, trust is that common theme. I don't think we've read a book yet that didn't have some nuances of trust throughout it. But the one I wanted to key on that I'd like your comment on about this lack of vision. And as I moved up in my professional life and reached, the C level, I find it, even at that first team level, that VP level, that it's easy to report the news. It's easy to report last quarter's results, but it's that rare individual who truly has that vision casting capability. Andy Stanley does a podcast. He's a pastor out of Atlanta, North Point Church, I believe it is. And he did an entire podcast on vision casting. And it's kind of much of the same, just reframing of the term lack of vision. Speak to that, if you would, in terms of the people that you've been associated with, that you come into contact with, that are great visionaries, and maybe people that are maybe not so much.
Yeah. So, I will say, an example of a great visionary was Alan. When he came to Ford, his official start date was in September. But prior to that, he went on a listening tour. So he spent 12 weeks walking around plants, walking around factories, walking around corporate offices, talking to people and listening to them and understanding what was working well, what wasn't working well, what would they change, right? He actually took the time to just come in and listen. And he took all of that information and he went back to his, Seattle, because he was from Boeing, right? And put together a strategy and a vision that was based on Henry Ford's original plan for the company, and came back. And when he started officially in September, that was the vision that he shared. And he was able to tell it in that compelling way because he had used the language that Henry Ford had. And, Ford was a very historical place with a lot of, historical knowledge. And so that really resonated for people because they felt, oh my gosh, he understands us. He gets us. And he's here with us and he's going to help. He's going to bring us along on that journey with him. And I think part of inspiring and having a vision is being able to get people to come along on the journey with you. It's when you have the vision and you don't get them to come along on the journey is when you have a problem, when it's not inspirational. So I think having that clear vision is part of inspiring people. And so when you don't have a clear vision, conversely, it's a little confusing, and I'm sure both of you have likely worked for individuals who didn't have a clear vision about what they wanted to accomplish. And it gets really frustrating because you don't know what your role is to get there. You don't see how your puzzle piece fits into that bigger picture. And everyone else around you is confused as well. And that leads to more infighting. It leads to more dysfunction. It leads to more people making up stories, because when there's a lack of information and an absence, people will make up to fill those gaps.
Exactly.
So
Or there's no vision, or there's the vision could be self-centered.
yes,
I just want to work until retirement, so I don't really care about the future of the company. Or it could be this is just a holding pattern for me. I have to check a box to be leading this operation for 2 years, and then I go to the parent company. And so they don't really care about a bigger vision. That I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it takes somebody special to really have a sincere heart for the place in the first place, to have a vision that's bigger than themselves, and care about the people that work there and who they serve, to even care to design a vision to look and see a vision that's bigger.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, we keep seeing little indicators that the tide is maybe changing in that space, right? Like, what is the purpose of a business? And the business roundtable a while ago decided 183 companies. Yes, the purpose is that all stakeholders will benefit, not just the stockholders, sorry.
Yeah.
And so we see that, and we start to see leaders that are trying to emulate that and model that. And we see other leaders that they didn't even sign that. And so it's not necessarily a priority for that organization. And, maybe those organizations are the ones that are having a little trouble with attrition these days.
Right. They start coming around when their numbers suffer and their competitor who's on board is on board, then they start to notice. They start to see it too. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, hey, you mentioned, that you're a fan of continuous learning, continuous education, and I'm sure you haven't stopped reading. I'm dying to know, what are the 3, 4, 5 titles and authors that you've got teed up to read in this space coming forward?
Oh my gosh, I have so, I can't show you my wall right now, but like, it's full of books, and so I love books. I love to read. I always have. One of the books that I just finished that I would highly recommend if you haven't read it is called Texas Made from Scratch, the Texas Roadhouse story.
I have that one.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I have teed up to read From Startup to Grown Up by Alyssa Cohn.
Don't have that one.
I have started to dive into it, and it is a fantastic read. It's geared towards entrepreneurs, but it also applies to startups.
And our audience is a mix of junior folks that are either in academia, early in their careers, looking for that secret sauce of what it takes to get to the next level, and then we've got a mix of mid-level managers that have aspirations for something bigger, something greater. I think the last data that Kelly had shared is we were a little over 8,000 views. We don't have all the demographics.
We're over 9,000 now, almost 10.
I stand corrected. So
we're not well known or anything, so we don't pay for ads or anything. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah.
So we've got Startup, we've got Taylor or Made from Scratch. Any others that you're suggesting?
There's one that just came out from Michael Bungay Stanier. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called How to Build Better Relationships with Just About Anyone. That's high on my list. You'd asked me about, other books that I have in me, and I have so much research from, this book. There are probably several books on the cutting room floor that didn't make it. Yeah. And one of those is around, building and sustaining and nurturing relationships. Most leaders that I talked with don't have a strategic relationship plan, how to build a relationship and who are they going to build them with, let alone navigate, the strategic, tactical, and operational steps of what do you do to do that? Like, what does that actually mean? And so I was really excited to see Michael's book come out, and I'm looking forward to reading that. It's on my list.
I'm a fan.
Well, we just did Indra Nui here 3 books ago, and she opens by saying, "Hey, this isn't the book that I intended to write, but where I started, that book was already done." So it sounds like you might have tapped on to something that nobody's filled that space yet. So good for you.
Yeah, potentially. We'll see. There's a book that I also have on my list called You, Me, and We, which is by Morag Bennett. I'm looking forward to reading that because it is about relationships and how to have a best friend at work, which, is not a terminology that we would normally hear used in the workplace. So I'm interested to read that. And there's a plethora of books out there. I'm sure you've heard of The Long Game from Dory Clark.
Oh yeah, we had that one too.
Yeah,
we did that one. Yeah,
that was a fantastic.
And we did To Be Honest also from Ron.
Yes, from Ron Carucci.
Yeah. Ron, we did his last year too.
Yeah.
What was your I'm going to ask you two things about your journey. What did you learn by creating this book and going through the journey? So what did you learn? And then I'm going to ask, what was your favorite part so far?
Yeah. I learned from writing this book, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that, sometimes it's a little challenging to see yourself in a new identity, as an author. I learned that by writing the book, it's a very different process than writing a dissertation. It was a very different style that I wanted to write the book in. Thank
you for that.
Yes. Oh, yes. It is not a copy paste of the dissertation. No. And I put that in the
yes.
I wanted people to know that this is not my dissertation.
Yes. Thank you.
But, I wanted the book to have a very conversational style and tone, and I wanted it to be as if, we were simply sitting and having a conversation and we were talking. And I had to work to write like that because it didn't come naturally to me. I write more naturally with like that dissertation style. So to learn how to write the voice and tone of this book took me a while. And getting that in a format where it was easy to read, it was a quick read, it was simple. You can start in any chapter. You don't have to read it chronologically. I learned that was going to resonate better with my audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I loved the format also. Brett and I talked about it the other day, the things that Brett said. And then one of the parts I loved the best was that you would tee up for your humans model, tee up the topic and the definition, the official definition, but then tell a story and an example. And so then I'm thinking like, oh, of course. But then you say, and here's why we don't do this. It's like, oh yeah. So that was kind of like jarred me like, oh yeah, that's right. I do those things too. Yeah. So I thought that was brilliant, like, because I could relate to those as well. Yeah. And so then that made me more open to recognizing why I don't do that, as well as I think, we all probably do all of these to some degree, but it helped me recognize where I could improve in those areas. So that was really.
But I agree. But I think the thing that's important, that took more work, more effort, more research, more thinking.
Right.
Exactly. There was more energy and effort put into this book than most because it just simply wasn't reporting case studies. It wasn't reporting annual reports. This had literally insights, direction, practical applications. Like I said, I could go on and on and on, but you can tell I'm a raving fan. It's well done.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I think what I learned the most from this book is how much I don't know.
Yeah.
Because every time I would go to write something, I wanted to make sure that it was accurate, that it was valid, that it was, well researched, that it was well referenced. And, it was important to me that it had that credibility from that standpoint. Even though it was not meant to be an academic book, I still wanted it to have those academic chops, that it was well researched, that was empirically sound, all of that kind of stuff. And I think in doing that, you just see the breadth of what's out there, and I was so grateful to be in that position because all of these amazing people that came before me, to do all of this research, I'm standing on all of their shoulders and leveraging all of their work that they worked their life on to be able to incorporate that into the book and share that with readers in a way that, if they haven't read those original, peer-reviewed articles, that it would be a way that they would have access to that information in a digestible format that was easy to read, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I've got to go find this peer-reviewed article in this journal and they've got a firewall and it's $36 for this article.
Right.
So I wanted that to be accessible. So the back of the book actually has like some
I
of my
have,
all-time favorites in the back of curated learning resources. And I find that a lot of those are the ones that I would refer to the most, when I'm working with coaching clients and with consulting clients, hey, I really love this, like, check this out. And I'll send them
yeah.
the
I
abstract.
grabbed a couple of those. I went back and got some.
Yeah.
And also all of that contributed to the assessment. And I want to make sure I point it out. And it's now toward the end of our time, and I will do it in the post, but the link here, drjennifernash.com/BHLH, Be Human, Lead Human.
Yeah.
And there's resources there and beyond the book, but one is the inside the book is an assessment, Lead Human Index.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, LHI or HLI?
The HLI, yeah, the Human Leader Index.
It's fantastic. And then the report blew me away. I sent you an email the other day because really that blew me away. The report was amazing, so useful. And I put it in this certain file. I probably have 50 types of these things. And same with Bret. We do them for any book that has it. And but I mean, just really blew me away. And to me, I didn't pay as much attention to the score, which I was very happy with my score. It was more the questions and the what I thought about, what did I think about, really there's so much there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't even know how much this book was, but it's not enough. Whatever people, you could charge $100 or more for this book, and that people are getting resources and that assessment, and it's phenomenal. So, yeah.
Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't, I have an amazing team that helps me, bring all of this together. I have a graphic designer that is par excellence.
Apparently really that, I love the cover, everything. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Amazing. Yeah.
Okay, what's been your favorite part of this whole journey so far?
Oh my gosh. There's so many. I think, I think one of the things that pops out to me is, I mentioned earlier in the show that, I have a background that isn't in business. And so I come from like a dance world and foreign languages and, music and that kind of stuff. And so, as a young child, I took ballet classes like many little girls do. And when the book came out, I actually got connected with my childhood ballet teacher. And I had not seen or spoken to her in 40 years.
Wow.
And I got the opportunity to talk with her. And, when you hear someone and you hear their voice and it just takes you right back, right? It's like if you smell their perfume or their cologne or, you hear the voice and it just takes you right back in your mind to that moment where you feel that energy, you felt that connection. And it was such a beautiful moment to have that opportunity to just talk to her now as an adult and just share with her how much her mentorship and her leadership meant to me at that age in my life and how inspiring that was to me, and how it really shaped me as a person, at that point, helped me grow into who I am today. And I loved having that opportunity to reconnect with her and thank her for that.
Oh, that's so nice.
I love your comment. It would be interesting to do, and not necessarily case studies, but who were the mentors that shaped Alan Mulally? You just talked about the mentors and leaders that came into your life, but I think all great leaders were mentored or modeled leadership of somebody that led them. And I'm a big fan of the idea that we lead how we would choose to be led. And as we do that, we inspire and motivate and make an impression and mentor the next generation of leaders. So, hats off to the leaders that are doing it well, because you are having an impact probably far and beyond what your expectations are.
Oh, my sole goal for this book is that it helps even just one leader lead more effectively, lead more humanely, lead in a way that helps change the culture of their organization, leaves a better workplace environment and a better culture for their employees and the people on their teams, and overall make the world a better place. We need better leadership so that we have a more peaceful, harmonious world that is more just for everyone.
Well, we're certainly aligned in that. We had to figure out why we did this, and Kelly and I did about a half a dozen of them. I said, Kelly, Simon Sinek 101, we need a why.
Yeah.
And we sat down one afternoon on a remote call. I think it was in the middle of COVID, and said, let's what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Neither one of us is drawing a paycheck from this. And it's, you know what, it's to inspire the leaders of tomorrow to invest in themselves today. So it's exactly what you talked about. And if we can inspire just one person, just one, to make that investment, to read a book that maybe they might not have, or watch a podcast or watch one of our shows, hey, you know what, it's all worth it.
And take away something from this, that they'll take away stuff from what you shared today that they'll get in addition to the book, so go deeper and it's fantastic. I wanted
Kelly
to share,
will wrap us up.
I wanted to share, I got this card years ago. Somebody left this card on my desk in my last corporate role that I had. And it says, if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams and you will always look lovely. And on the inside, it is a sticker typed, don't let them get you down. And somebody left this for me anonymously because the company was going through a really, really, really tough time. And there was a lot going on and they didn't want to have their name on this. And they left it for me anonymously in one of those envelopes, like what you talked about in my desk. So, so circling back, and we've talked about Alan Mulally, and because he came up in your book and he's been talked about in others, we picked him for our August book. So our next month, we're going to do Relentless Implementation, which I think just kind of picks up from this, like picks up where this goes. Like, this is a good foundation for that. You can't do relentless implementation if you're not this person. You need this person.
Yes.
So, and he's a KU guy. He's at University of Kansas. His mom's from Lawrence.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
KU for undergrad.
Wow.
I think
the better.
MIT maybe for grad school, but engineering. So.
Well, hey, I'll let Kelly wrap us up, Dr. Nash, but thank you so much for an hour. We could probably go 2 or 3, and I wish we had that time, but what a pure pleasure, joy, privilege to spend this time with you. Kudos for a great, great book. You did a phenomenal job, and I'm sure you probably hear that often, but the privilege was certainly all mine and all Kelly's to spend this time with you. You've made us both better.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that. Sometimes it's a pretty tough journey as an author. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for helping me get this message out to the world.
And just so you know, we're not the easiest audience. We don't like all the books. We don't always agree. Sometimes we don't agree. We do a poll at the end of the three of us, and we don't always agree to recommend the book. So that we're both aligned so sincerely on yours is amazing. That's shocking me today that we're both so much so in love with this. So I'm looking forward to sharing it more with more people too. So, and I think this is the longest one that we've had, the longest conversation that we've had.
I was mentioning too to someone else the other day that, universities, if they're looking for leadership books that are a little bit different and a little bit unique, this is a great book to be able to use for, business students that are just in those formative stages of figuring out, not only who are they as people, but who do they want to be as leaders, and how do they want to intentionally design that career path for themselves? So that when they're going through the recruiting process, they already know some of the great questions to ask that will help them understand where are they going to be a good fit, and where, will they feel that they find that purpose and that alignment with the values that they have because they've gone through that process.
Exactly.
So yes, I just wanted to throw that out there in case any of your audience is listening about that and wondering.
And they are, because I teach a strategic career management class in the MBA program, and another class I teach is leadership. And so at least that group is listening from one school, but hopefully more will listen and get that message, and we'll tag them and share that message, and hopefully that will spread. Yeah, so fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us today. And thank you everybody who joined today, and anybody that watches after, and take the assessments and get in touch with Jennifer. And there's resources that she so generously shares. So get in touch with her for those as well on the website that's posted there. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So.